Hello everyone, I'm Matt Mitrich, the alternate historian, and with me today is Alexander Wallace, also known as SpanishSpy on alternathistory.com. In case you guys don't know, Alex has written a lot of stuff, both for online alternate history and also things for my blog as well. He is the author of The Rise of the Tri-State World Order and also Winged Hands of the Reich. Those are both two stories of his that I've covered on my blog. And he's done a lot of other stuff. I'll make sure to put links for this in the comment area so that you guys can check it out. He also has written lots of guest posts for my blog. He's did Parley Pro and PODs, and it was all about the Model UN and how you can use alternate history with it. Additionally, he's written some editorials, including A Timeline Author's Plea, In Defense of Forms, and again, I'll make sure I link to all these. And he also has an interview series on my blog where he interviewed a lot of administrators of various alternate history forums besides alternathistory.com. He also interviews, just interviews, but does stuff for Odyssey. Is it mostly just interviews, or do you?
I've done articles before. It's for, I have a weekly deadline, so interviews are easier to make the deadline with all the stuff I need to do.
Yeah.
And I also write for the Tab. I've just published a article about what's like growing up as an Arlingtonian from Arlington, Virginia, after seeing all this terror after growing up when the ground zero was 9/11. So you can take a look at that if you like. So yeah, I'm Alex Wallace, aka SpanishSpy, aka Alex Red Alert, and on Skype and a few other things. So if you want to contact me, here I am. I have a blog I haven't updated for 2 months.
Yeah, you haven't done anything since January 24th, 2016. What's up with that?
That's because, okay, a lot of my early Odyssey Online stuff was actually stuff I was going to do for the blog, but then on the college Facebook group was like, hey, you want to write for Odyssey Online? And I'm like, yes! So a lot of the ideas for that have now become Odyssey. The Odyssey fulfills the gap that I originally had filled with my blog. So there's Odyssey Online, there's the Tab, so that's where I write my nonfiction. I haven't written as much fiction lately because I've been really busy. Spent more stuff over the summer.
Well, we are not here to talk about Alex, actually. We're here to talk about 1984 by George Orwell, also known as Eric Blair. And we're going to talk about sort of this impact of this book on alternate history in general, because if you've spent any time on the alternate history forums or wikis or whatever, you've probably seen people compare or even get inspired their works. I can't talk today. Their works are inspired by this book in many ways. So, yeah, let's begin. Alex, what is your thoughts about 1984?
1984 is, I think, it's very disturbingly prescient. It was written in the 40s. It was written for the context of the 40s. It was originally I want to call it 1948, but they said that was too soon. We just switched the letter, so that's why it's 1984. So I think it's a fascinating book. I read it when I was in middle school and when my grandfather gave it to me. And if he had made that clear, The Rise of the Tri-State World Order, the book I read, is a timeline I wrote that explains the world in 1984. And that's how much I like this book. This book, I think, is one of the most influential books of the 20th century, easily.
Yeah, if we can talk a little bit more about your story. This is, I think you were telling me earlier, this is like a story you actually wrote in your English class in high school, is that correct?
That is correct. I had to do a project for my English class sophomore year of high school, and there was the option of do whatever the hell you want. So I'm like, I was still early on H.com. I was still getting my start, and I'd written my first timeline, Liberty and Death, if any of you people remember that, and I was like, I could kill two birds with one stone. I could have a hell of a lot of fun for a grade, and then I could get some recognition at H.com. I mean, there was Will Ritson's Images of 1984, but that was the Great Britain as North Korea option. So I wanted to go a little darker, and I was saying what Goldstein says is true, that the world really is divided among three plutocratic states that hate human liberty and happiness and all that jazz.
Yeah, there seems to be, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there does seem to be, there's this theory online, and I talk about it in one of my most recent videos, Space Filling Empires, where there's an argument that everything that we learn about the outside world in 1984 isn't real, that everything's fine, it's only Britain that is this xenophobic, solitary state. And it's an interesting theory. Not everyone subscribes to it. Whenever I bring it up, there's always someone who will make arguments and poke holes in it, and that's fine. But then again, you can almost kind of see that the world they create through these massive empires may in some ways not make a lot of sense either. Now, granted, you did a really good job though explaining this. I mean, you pulled a lot, especially from. I thought some of the interesting things you did in your story was you pulled a lot of like psychologists, famous psychologists, who sort of like seem to be laying the seeds for creating the kind of culture that would make people more susceptible to a massive totalitarian state run by technocrats, essentially.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun just picking different historical figures to use. I mean, I had Richard Nixon beat Big Brother for a while.
Yeah.
That was quite fun. I had William Dudley Pelley, a leader of American nationalists in the 30s, who was the original Big Brother. And of course, Hitler plays a role, Himmler plays a role, Churchill plays a role. Stalin shows up. A lot of people in the early 20th century show up, and there's all sorts of things. Like there's some. I put in a few in jokes. That Jerry Falwell is a party boss. So is J.D. Salinger helped invent the machines that make novels. So that's just.
I forgot about that. But you know, your story is just probably one of many stories that are either directly set in this universe as people try to explain it, or they're at least inspired by it. I don't know if you've ever read R.V.B. O'Malley's.
Oh, I love R.V.B. O'Malley. He is what made me register on Ancient Times, so I could read Ad Astra per Aspera.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, he did this. What was his name? His space opera that he created.
Yeah.
Ad Astra.
Ad Astra per Aspera.
Yeah, and it's highly influenced by 1984.
Oh, I can tell. It's like 1984 in space.
That's really what it is. There's these three different massive states, and they all kind of correspond in more ways than one to the super states of Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia. And you know, but even then, that's like a very obvious influence. You see a lot of other timelines though that do borrow a lot of kind of stuff from the story, and sometimes just like alternate histories in general. I think Alan Moore in one of the like sequels to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen actually worked in plot points and characters from 1984 into his alternate history of England. I think what was his name? Clement Attlee was actually supposed to be Big Brother in his story, his version of the timeline, which I thought was kind of funny. But here's the question though, the big one, the reason why we're having this talk. Why? Why is 1984 has such an impact on alternate history?
Well, one of the things that I think is somewhat paradoxical in how the AH community loves it, and it is tied into the argument about how Oceania may just be Britain's, that the focus isn't the world building, but Orwell does a very good job of world building. And that is what I think most of the influence comes from. He has explained it in a lot of detail, these three superstates, the no man's land, Tangier, Brazzaville, Darwin, and Hong Kong, and how these states work. He's given the ideologies names like neo-Bolshevism, and he even goes so far as to do something that is reminiscent of age timelines. There's this excerpt from Goldstein's book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. And when I was reading that, I thought that bit was fascinating. I read it during the class I did that would ultimately make my timeline, and I was one of the few people who really found it to be interesting. But all my fellow 16-year-olds thought it was like, this is boring. No, I think this is fascinating. And that is what really played into how I wrote it. I can only imagine that bit in particular was something that really played into a lot of alternate historians who read it and were influenced by it.
It is interesting that you bring up the whole world building aspect, because I think that's one thing alternate historians do very well, is the world building. In fact, if you kind of like look at a lot of stuff that is produced on alternatehistory.com, on the wiki, on any other kind of site out there, a lot of it is just world building. It is a lot of just adding details to the world, and not so much fiction. People do write fiction, obviously, and publish that as well. But it's this strong trend of just making this believable, plausible world. That's always a buzzword with alternate history. It's not plausible, it's implausible, it's whatever. But people will create these worlds, these timelines, and they're always striving to make it as plausible as possible, even though they change it. And I guess that's maybe something that causes people to really kind of gravitate toward 1984, is that they found it rather plausible. But the question is then, is it plausible? Because I feel like there's a lot of aspects of this that people probably would find a little bit silly, including, I bring up my old video, the space-filling empires. I feel like that's a attack that people do a lot when they just see these massive, arbitrarily large empires that just seem to ignore geography and stuff like that and just spread across the continent, just like the three superstates in 1984. So why does certain aspects of 1984 that don't seem very believable get a pass, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's also a plausibility, isn't that? As I said, his focus isn't the world building. It's this denunciation of totalitarianism. He was influenced by the Nazis, he was influenced by the Soviet Union under Stalin, and in many ways, that form of totalitarianism came true. I mean, he didn't predict the internet, he didn't predict stuff like the National Security Agency or the GCHQ in Britain, so on and so forth, but that is in many ways has come true. That's surveillance, censorship to a degree. I don't think that he's predicted everything. I think that a mix between Orwell and Huxley's Huxley's Brave New World is what came true, and it's also kind of scary if you read both of those books. I highly recommend reading Brave New World. I was writing a timeline based off of it, but then my laptop died.
No.
I want to go back to that someday. It got really long and really tedious to write, so.
So what parts of Brave New World do you feel have come true? I know we're getting a little off topic, but bear with me.
Well, Brave New World is about a world state where there's this great infographic that's made its way around the internet that compares Orwell and Huxley. Just search Orwell, Huxley, Imgur, and you'll find it. And it said that Orwell was afraid the truth would be censored. Huxley was afraid that the truth would become irrelevant, that there'd just be so much vapid entertainment, so much useless information that while it's important, will be obscured. You see, you laugh, but that's so true.
No, my channel is part of that entertainment that you just mentioned.
I mean, I like to think we're a little bit more highbrow than some people Bumble Puppy say. That's the name of the game in Brave New World. So,
yeah, I forgot about that.
So, I think that in many ways that's come true. Neither of them predicted the internet, but both of them would be horrified and amazed by it, and even more horrified by the surveillance state that's been made in several countries. So,
yeah, I mean, there's that famous meme you see where it's the icon that in England they put all these like blue circles that marked where like famous people lived and stuff like that. And there's, for George Orwell, there's a camera right above it. It's just like, oh, that's unfortunate.
It's beautifully ironic, but also sadly ironic.
Someone never wrote his books when they put that there. But so maybe we're kind of getting that onto why alternate historians like 1984 kind of looking at Brave New World. Is it something to do because they're both dystopias?
Yeah, they're both very much dystopias. To quote this Imgur thing going around, it's something like Orwell was afraid that what we hate would be used to control us. Huxley was afraid that what we love would use to control us. So it would be just flooding us with meaningless entertainment. Like, I mean, whenever this comes up, there's always a comparison to the Kardashians. So stuff like that, and that would be used to distract the people and let the government do all sorts of heinous stuff.
Well, yeah, the fear was an underlying theme throughout most of 1984. I was always afraid of what the government would do if they caught you not, following the rules. But in Brave New World, it was happiness. It was like, happiness was the most important. We strive to make you happy. And if you can't fit in this, if you just for whatever reason can't fit in this society, you're sent to an island. And they're not like, I remember something about Brave New World, they're not, what's the word looking for, vicious or anything like that. They tend to be nice to these people who don't conform. It's like, we're not sending you to some barren rock where you're going to suffer. No, you go to a nice island. It just can't leave. You can do all you want there and enjoy yourself, but you're not leaving.
Yeah.
But even when someone didn't want to take that option, like the main character, not really the main character because it came in like halfway through the book, but you know what I'm talking about, right? The guy who's John Savage. Yeah. he rejected it. He's like, all right, go ahead and not be happy. And he wasn't, and he ended up killing himself at the end. Spoiler alert, in case anyone hasn't read the book. But yeah, and it was that whole this. I remember one scene from Brave New World that really sort of was disturbing, but kind of made a sick kind of sense. Was that they wanted to get people used to death, the idea of death. So people who were dying, they would put in these rooms full of happy images, and then they would take kids there, and the kids would play around and eat ice cream just to get them okay with the idea of death, so they can that their brain somehow equates death with a kind of sense of happiness. And I thought that, wow, that's kind of disturbing in many ways. But yeah, it is an interesting contrast between the two stories, the happiness and the fear. Although, to be fair, I think you see more influence from 1984 probably in a lot of forums and books and things like that than you probably see in Brave New World.
Yeah, among all the history, I think 1984 has been the more influential one because it has the stuff that alternate historians like. It has war, it has technology, it has really kind of obviously scary things. It has states you can easily draw fancy uniforms for. It has flags and maps and all that. While in Brave New World, it's the world state, the one state that rules the world and drowns you in meaningless happiness.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is alternate historians, their love of war, of dystopia as a dictatorship, is that a good thing? Or is that just sort of part of the time? Because a lot of science fiction writers have written editorials saying that science fiction isn't as optimistic as it used to be. It's not as forward-looking as it used to be. It's sort of mired in the darkness of the present and reflecting that as well. So is 1984's influence on alternate history just part of a larger trend of pessimism in today's society, or is something unique, or is that unique to alternate history, that we are just a genre of people who don't have high opinions of the future?
I'd say that there's a bit of both. I'd say that reading history has made me very cynical. Mm-hmm. It's just that the more you read, the more you realize human history is murder and suffering. And so history naturally brings you that. I mean, people are interested in wars, and like American Civil War and Revolutionary War, the World Wars definitely. I think partially because 1984 is so based off the era of World War II that makes it very influential. And I've written a blog post about why I think that World War II is so popular. It's because, I don't know how else to phrase it, it's cool. You have tanks, you have planes, you have big naval battle, you have like Kursk, you have the Battle of Britain, you have Barbarossa, and things before that and after that just aren't as flashy. And also, R.V.B. O'Malley says that he prefers to write dictatorships because the politics is more honest and more forthright, and that democracies are like high school. And that's why he doesn't like writing democracy, because it's just a popularity contest time and again. And I've heard a lot of people say the same. Authoritarian systems are interesting because of how perverse they can be. But I would also say that there's a lot of stuff that has to do with the times. At least since 9/11, maybe before that, there's this feeling that, for one, an attack could happen at any time, and two, the government is doing all sorts of disturbing stuff to counteract that, like Gitmo and the NSA and Abu Ghraib, so on and so forth. And I think this time is a very cynical one. That it looks like that the world isn't going anywhere good, and that's reflected in science fiction and in alternate history. But I personally think alternate history has some predisposition to such things.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the history kind of makes it cynical, that there's a lot of horrible things in history. And one of my pet peeves is when someone says, oh, things were so much better in the past, things were so much better in the 50s, 60s, 30s, whatever. And it's like, you've never actually opened a history book, have you? You're just making this assumption, this golden age in the past, and that human society has sort of declined. Although, as many people have pointed out, people are living longer, food is more plentiful. Ideas like ideas like the overpopulation, us becoming so populous that this was it was so popular that even like Isaac Asimov, wrote about it, that humanity would have to like come into these huge megacities because they would just so they can be so efficient to feed everybody, because we wouldn't have a planet. But then that was before the Green Revolution, which made it allowed to get more food, grow more food, to produce more food, and so it's this idea that we always think the world, the present is not as good as it was in the past, but we kind of look at the past with some through rose-colored glasses, through nostalgia goggles. We tend to forget about the bad parts and overemphasize the good parts. And while at the present we highlight the bad parts, especially now in this era of 24-hour news, where you have to keep people watching, you have to keep ratings up. And what keeps ratings up by some violent attack, some war, something that would get an alternate story, really excited, like a dictator, taking power or something like that. So it's like, maybe that's kind of what has made, in many ways, alter history more popular in the mainstream, because recently Amazon has had a huge success hit with the Man in the High Castle adaptation, and that too has a lot of similarities with 1984, totalitarian states, space-filling empires, because you got the Greater German Reich, and you got the East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, the Great East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, yeah, I'll say that. And so you have a lot of similarities, I think, between one of the most famous books of alternate history and 1984 as well. And again, I guess I'm kind of on the fence about whether alternate history is more pessimistic and most science fiction, because I definitely feel like reading a lot of non-alternate history books, a lot of science and fiction, even some fantasy, things have gotten a lot darker. Like, all right, here's another show that's really popular, Game of Thrones. That has taken epic fantasy, and which used to be sort of very Tolkien-esque, and it's kind of like threw it in the gutter a little bit. Not that saying that what he's saying didn't happen. No, of course it happened, but they're really highlighting the bad parts of what happened, and maybe because people have ignored it since then. Maybe that's why the show has been so popular, because it's so refreshing. Sometimes the good guys lose, sometimes they get their head chopped off, and no one comes in at the last minute to save them. And it's so yeah, I'm not convinced completely that maybe alternate history is more pessimistic than others, but certainly 1984 is an important part of it. I mean, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I still read this on occasion, and I still sort of hope that that they won't get caught, that they won't get tortured and everything like that at the end. And they always do. It's one of those false hopes of things like they're gonna get away, they're gonna fight the government and bring it down. They're just like Luke Skywalker, and no, they're not. They lose. And I guess maybe that's why in the end this is such a popular book, because in history people lose. Sometimes you see a culture and you think, wow, this culture was so progressive for its time. I really wanted to survive. Oh wait, it was destroyed by barbarians, and everything that they were was either destroyed or forgotten about. No.
Or they elect a government that starts a gigantic war and a genocide that killed 11 million people. Mm-hmm. So that's
yeah, and it's sort of like, going back to maybe even farther in the past a little bit, like World War I. I mean, you think about all the people who died in that conflict, and some of them were composers and poets and artists and authors, and think of all those people who then died. What did we miss out on? Could they have created some piece of artwork that we haven't seen yet, because it'll never be created, because it could only have been created by that person. I mean, certain things like technology, even if the person who's given credit for inventing it may die, you got to make an argument that eventually someone's going to figure it out. But when it comes to artwork, it's hard to think that someone who's going to make the exact same painting, the exact same play, the exact same opera, they'll never do it. It's such a subjective form of creation that you'll never see that again. And I guess that's kind of what scares me the most about 1984 too, is that that's what the government does. It destroys all that subjectivity. One character got in trouble, I think, because there just wasn't enough words in the English language to describe something, so he had to, I can't remember what he used, but he had to use something that was forbidden, and so he got in trouble. And it was just that, yeah, it's so, the government was just like making it almost impossible to express yourself in any meaningful way. And as alternate historians, what do? We create, in many ways, we create stuff. Even if we're basing it much on history that we know, we create stuff. We try to be clever, we try to be imaginative, and to have that taken away from you. Yeah, I can see why a lot of alternate historians take this book seriously, because it would literally destroy the thing we love the most. Because why would a government who wants you to toe the line want you thinking about a history, a timeline where they don't exist? Thoughts? I went on a rant there, I kind of...
No, I've done the same. That, I think, really plays into it, that the idea of us not being able to do what we love, to speculate, is, I think that's a great fear that may be subconscious in a lot of these writers. I wouldn't be surprised it happened to me when I was writing around the Tri-State World Order. And so, I think that is very relevant. That's very important to it.
Well, any final thoughts on 1984?
I think that, just to round it out, there's that definite sense that its world building is what brought it to why it's so loved by all the historians. That it's fascinating how these states could come into being out of a somewhat familiar starting point, the early 20th century. We're familiar with the World War II era. In many ways, it's very important to many nations' national identities nowadays. Arthur B. O'Malley says that World War II is now more important than the Revolution in the American national identity. I mean, it's very important in Russia, in Britain, in France, and it defined our world, really. And so we can see the effects, what Orwell was going with. And we can see some of that in our world, and it's disturbingly familiar in many ways, even if it's not in the same way that he had speculated. I mean, neither Orwell nor Huxley speculated with the internet, but it happened, and it's been used in the ways that they were using other things in their novels. So it's quite intimidating. It's poignant, it's disturbing, and it's fascinating. That's why I think all the historians love it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And if for whatever reason, if you're watching this and you haven't read the book, shame on you.
Yeah,
and then go read it.
You read it, read Brave New World, read The Rise of the Tri-State World Order, because I wrote it, and I got turned love for it, and then read everything else I've written and comment on it if I don't get any comments, and then vote for it in the Turtle Loves or whatever other awards I get, because I want publicity, and I'm very self-interested and greedy, and I'm not gonna lie to you about that. And read my articles, my interviews for him and for Odyssey, for the tab, and just read my stuff so I'm not jobless after college.
And don't forget to watch my videos.
And watch his videos.
Indeed. Well, Alex, it's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you for
Thank you.
being on the show. Guys, I'm Matt Mitchers, the alternate historian, and that's all I got to say on the subject. If you like what I do, please comment, subscribe, support me on Patreon. I'll see you guys later. Bye.